cover. So as I said at the beginning, this is quite a fast-paced workshop today, so there's lots to take in. This one is on discovering your customers. So obviously in the last session we covered your problem statement essentially, so looking at not the solution that you're trying to provide, but trying to work out the problem behind that. So we're now going to move on to discovering your customers. Now that you have your problem, you think that you know what the issue may be, we need to check that out. So it's all well and good kind of having an idea that the problem exists yourself, and maybe you know that from experience. We've had a couple of people, especially in the session on Monday, you know, where they said, look, I've been doing this for 11 years, I know this is a problem. That's an excellent start. However, you still need to do the research and discovering your customers, talking to your customers, and trying to work out if they experience the same problem, because we're not denying that you might experience it, but at the same time, people might experience the same thing but differently, or they might just not experience it at all. So you really want to do your research before you start investing in all of your products or your services, whatever offering it is that you have, to make sure that you are actually doing something that the market wants. So without further ado, let's get going. Okay, we've done this part, I think, as we were setting up. So this is just the intros to myself and Mark. We can... Excellent. So today's goals, we're going to discover the thrill of deep customer understanding and being proved wrong as well. So this is a really important part of it. You want to make sure that we're not going into this trying to prove ourselves right, because that's obviously going to be, we're going to get some pretty biased information, and we'll go through exactly what that means as we're sort of looking at each different step. But it's not necessarily a bad thing to be proved wrong. So if all of your evidence turns around and says, actually, this isn't a problem, it's better to have found out now than before you've invested sort of 10, 15, 20,000 pounds into producing MVPs and so on and so forth. So I know nobody really wants to be told that they're wrong, but it's worth embracing it. Because if you don't, we have seen examples of people that have just wanted to prove themselves right the whole way through. They've ignored certain data, and they've gone on, produced a product that has then flopped because nobody actually really wanted it in the first place. We're going to introduce the customer development process, and build your customer persona and primary research plans. So this will all become a little bit clearer as we're going through. Mark, do you want to go to the next slide? Thank you. And as we said before, do connect with us. The link that was on that slide, and you will get a copy of all of this anyway, was for Ed, and anyone that came again last month will have met Ed Halliday. But you obviously, we can put our links for our LinkedIn's as well in the chat so that you've got those by the end too. So we're going to cover what makes a great idea, about the customer discovery process itself and how to go through that so that you're aware, the 5 steps to actually discovering your customers, and then we have a Q&A, albeit we actually don't have one this morning, but you guys are all welcome to join this afternoon. We have one of the previous winners from last year, I believe, is coming back and giving us a talk for 10 minutes. So anybody who is interested in hearing that, then it's definitely worth joining us later this afternoon. We've got another session from 4 till 6, but they'll be joining us at around about sort of 22, quarter to 6. Next slide, Mark, sorry. Okay, so just a question for you guys. A little bit of a recap. What's the first thing that we ask entrepreneurs? If everyone can start using the chat, a little bit of engagement, that'd be great. What do you think, as sort of business coaches, as you know, maybe people that are on the other end of funding? So if you're looking for funding, what is the first question that you as an entrepreneur would be asked most likely? Anybody got any ideas?
Maybe about they will ask about your capabilities or your skills. You can do it, who you are. Are you capable of doing this or not?
Yeah, that's a good one. Absolutely. And that's definitely a big part of it. I've given you a pretty big hint, I think, in some of the stuff that I've said already. And for anyone,
you mean in customer identification and from the previous class, session, we talked about trying to understand if this problem actually exists and trying to identify the best way to do it.
Absolutely, absolutely. It is the problem. Yeah. And I know that we sort of covered this in extensive detail last month, but it is really, really worth just reiterating that the problem is what you're going to be asked about first, not your solution. You can come with a fancy app, you can have built everything, it can look, really sexy, but if there is no problem and you can't prove that there's any problem, nobody will invest in you. So it's really, really worth, getting down to what that actual problem is and being very, very specific about it. Next slide, Mark. In fact, I think it's 2 on now. And the second question, anybody got any ideas as to what the second question is that you're going to be asked after what is the problem? Mark, do you want to go on to the next slide?
So a good way to think about this is imagine literally being in a meeting with an investor, someone you're trying to pitch to, maybe a potential mentor. So some of the things that we've got up are who's the person that you're most united to help? How will you solve it? Who are your target users? These are all really great. And why are you passionate about it? Absolutely. These are all really, really good ideas. Funnily enough, what comes before all of those each time is who have you spoken to about this problem, right? It's the how do you know this is a problem, right? That's really what people are looking for. If you're saying, hey, I want to sell this revolutionary type of shoe, it's going to get rid of back pain, great. But if you're selling it to people who are in an office desk and they're sitting down all the time and their problem is how they sit, a shoe isn't necessarily going to solve how you sit better. So speaking to people is that validation, that customer development that is oh so important. And ultimately, I'm a big fan of thinking about things in reverse as well. So if I ask you, who have you spoken to about this problem? And the answer is no one. How do you think your audience might react to that?
And it's a little bit like I said before, even if you know it's a problem because you've experienced it yourself, if you're going to stand in front of a set of investors and you're going to say, look, I'm looking for, £50,000 investment, £100,000 investment, is someone going to put that down on the table for you just because you have a problem? No. They're going to want to know that you've spoken to a larger subset of people. With my clients, I usually suggest to them, it does depend upon the industry and obviously how many people that you think that you might be able to get, but a decent number of people is potentially between maybe 50 to 100. Some people do more, some people do a few less, but so long as you've got enough people that you can put forward to a group of investors or anybody that might be interested in your business, and before you want to go and put your money down as well, you need to know that you've spoken to enough people that you are absolutely resolved that this is a problem that you can fix for multiple people, not just for yourself. Okay, next slide. Okay, so this one's just a reminder that without customer understanding, you're not going to solve their problem and they aren't going to use your product. So it doesn't matter how good, innovative, beautiful, affordable a product may be. And we have seen this before. We've had examples, when people have produced this amazing app or they've actually gone and found manufacturers and they've produced a particular MVP as a sort of example to how it can be used. And then nobody's bought the product because they were so set on the fact that this is the solution that they wanted to create that they forgot to ask, will the customers actually use the product that they are selling? And maybe the answer is yes, but maybe it needs some tweaks. Maybe it needs, oh yes, but it would be better if it was done this way. And you're going to glean a lot of information the more people that you're speaking to, which is why, again, we sort of say, speak to sort of 50 to 100 people. So you said, how do we know that we've talked to enough people? Well, like I say, I would say if you're going to stand in front of sort of, a subset of investors, somewhere between sort of 50 and 100 is a really good number. If you were to say that in front of us and say, look, this is a problem, and I know that because I've spoken to 100 people, you're going to get people go, oh, wow, okay, he's done his research. but you also just want to make sure that you feel comfortable in yourself. Do you feel like you have spoken to enough people that you understand that this really is a problem? And if you're still umming and ahhing and you're saying, well, yeah, some people said yes, but some people were a little bit unsure, speak to some more people. If it takes 150, speak to 150. If you think you've got it after 40, great, good for you. But so long as you have spoken to enough people that you can confidently sit there yourself and say, I would be willing to invest my money and my time in this because I know that it's a problem and here's the evidence, that's where you're at enough. Okay, well,
as a quick check-in, has anyone started speaking to customers or potential customers yet? Maybe pop a hand in the air. Derek Law. Mm-hmm. Who did you speak to?
And Omar as well. And how are you guys finding it as well? Helpful so far? Okay.
So I spoke to a lot of my university friends about my idea. Great. And are university students your target audience?
Insightful, to say the least. Yeah, can be, very much so.
And then we've got another hand up as well. Sonia, if I am pronouncing Sonia right. Who did you speak to?
Just while we're waiting for Sonia to come back, Derek said, partly my idea is targeted for 20 to 40-year-olds. So yeah, we're going to go into this a little bit later, but I would definitely look at the different personas of the people that you're going to be serving. And, if you're speaking to lots of people within their 20s, then that's great. But we also want to make sure that of that 50 to 100 people you're speaking to, they're also in their 30s and 40s as well, so that you can say that you've spoken to the full spectrum.
Fab. Mohammed, anything to add?
I'm someone who already did the mistake of creating the initial product or the MVP. Then I asked people. So from there, I just realized that I have to renovate everything. So I asked potentially 20 clients, and they gave me some feedbacks on based on that. And right now, I'm trying to do some as advised, like more of blind again, taking even a further step back by actually going to people, just talk about their problems before trying to establish the solution.
Absolutely, that's a great way to do it. That's a really good way to do it. And all of it's learning, right? So don't kick yourself about the fact that you've done your MVP already. All of it's learning, and the fact that you have actually taken that step to go back and ask customers, and you are going to renovate, is a really, really good sign. So yeah, fair play to you. Well done.
Thank you.
No problem. Right. Mark, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, so a fun way of looking at this as well is that we all have our different skill sets, backgrounds, and expertise. A couple of groups who are almost naturally good at this by virtue of the way they think about the world. Anthropologists, product designers, architects, UX, UI designers, marketeers, science fiction writers. The logic behind this is that they're very good at discovering things, questioning things, not accepting the status quo, and not taking things for granted. And when you have that inquisitiveness, that curiosity, it really does drive you down the rabbit hole. I cannot tell you how many times I meet startup founders who start with an idea here, and then as they start to understand the problem, they go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. They end up solving something over here rather than up here, right? That's not even a pivot, a change of direction. It's just greater focus. And all of that always comes from customers. And similarly, you can always tell the less confident entrepreneurs because they don't necessarily have confidence in what they're building, because they don't have confidence that the customer's going to buy it. So much of this confidence comes from being able to stake your absolute reputation on being able to sell what it is that you're creating because you've done so much research that you know full well once it's built, designed, delivered, whatever, they will purchase it. And again, I can say this, having been through this so many times now with different businesses where I've started with a problem, customer group, and gone, I'm going to build X for Y, and it will have these results. And I'm so confident in the ability to deliver that and to actually solve that problem that it does help you win that first client. And then, of course, once you've got the first client, confidence is only going up. As you get more clients, confidence is only going to go up. So it starts here. Oh. Over to you, Laura.
Excellent. Next slide then, please. Thank you. So, I mean, this is just a little bit of a laugh for you, but, you know, would you believe that this actually is something that someone has designed? How this managed to get through production and nobody questioned it, I just don't know. But an example here of some bad designs. I think I even had this as a comedy card once. So yeah, it's one of those things, and I've seen plenty of examples, especially coming from the property industry. There are many examples of you know, silly designs that people just really haven't thought through, and some of them are very common sense and very basic. So, but because we sort of get so into our own solution, our own designs, our own you know, this is the way forward, sometimes those can be overlooked. So again, you know, this is why we sort of bring people in. We get lots of different ideas and perspectives to try and sort of make sure that we don't come up with this. And on the next slide as well, I think there's an example of user experience. Yeah, here we go. So without asking anybody, you know, what they're actually doing, yes, you might design something that they want, but you've ignored kind of the way that they use the product. So the design is taking you one way, but actually without asking anyone, you don't realize that their user experience is taking a shortcut elsewhere. And so by asking as many people as you possibly can, you're able to avoid that mistake, because sometimes that mistake can be quite costly, both in time and also financially as well. So it's just a nice way of looking at that. Okay, so what stops us doing this? On the next slide, I think these ones are going to go through quite quickly, but it's scary and it's uncomfortable, right? It's easy to sit behind the laptop. It's easy to sit there and do a bit of research, do a bit of Googling, you know, you're safe and warm in your own house. And actually what we're going to be asking you to do is to get out, you know, and it might be that that is, you know, with a clipboard on the street, asking people to stop, you know, as they go past. It might be that you're going to, you know, go specifically to the places that your customers are. But either way, you know, it's not as comfortable as just sitting on your laptop. So, but it is still worth doing. We believe that our assumptions are right. We're going to go through this again very briefly in a bit more detail. But as I've said already, you know, a lot of the time we come to every situation with our own assumptions, and everything that we know or that we feel that we understand comes from our previous experiences. So everything that we've been taught as a child, everything that we've learned in education. So we assume, and this is as a coach as well, I'm a trained coach. One of the things that is hammered into you when you're trained as a coach is that you can't assume that when somebody says, for example, you know, oh, I was incredibly frustrated at this, you can't then go, oh, I know exactly how you feel, because you don't. You might have experienced the same situation as them. You might have a level of understanding of their frustration, but actually by assuming that you know exactly what you're talking about, you might miss something. And so by asking that further question as to, can you tell me what that frustration actually feels like? You get them to articulate the frustration, and it might end up being, and I've had this experience many times, it's actually completely different to what you thought it was, because you've experienced it in two different ways. So again, another reason why we want you to challenge your own assumptions, and make sure that you're not just sort of charging ahead without asking anybody else what theirs are. We obsess about our product vision. Yeah, this is a classic one. You know, we think what we've done is right. We love it. You know, it becomes our baby. You get that sort of mum attitude of nobody can tell me that my baby isn't the best thing in the world. And in actual fact, that's what we were saying at the beginning. You need to open yourself up to the fact that maybe you're wrong, or maybe there is something that would be a better fit, or, you know, something that you could change that would provide a better user experience. Next one.
I'll jump in with a specific example here, actually, because with product vision, if your vision is big enough and you've spoken to your customers, the input and the challenges that you get from people are going to refine what you're doing. They're not going to throw you off your vision, right? It's when your vision is too small that you can get obsessed, and then you miss the opportunities for feedback, for learning, for growth. So very specific example, in my business with Thrust Carbon, our vision is very much of a world where our actions don't have to cost the earth, right? It's how do we drive travel to be effortlessly green, right? The world is where we can travel and it not be pumping out fossil fuels and destroying our planet, right? The ways in which we're going to get there are going to change as technology evolves, as our technology evolves, and we're consistently challenging every hypothesis and assumption made in the business. But that vision, because it is so robust and clear and focused on 2050, if not sooner, can stay really crystal clear. It's when vision is too small that it becomes the problem. So blow it up.
Absolutely. Okay, next one. It's easy to stay seated behind a screen. Yep, as I've said, it's more comfortable to stay at home and do your own research, but we are encouraging you to get out there. And I think, yeah, Mark, do you want to go through this example? Because I think you know them fairly well, don't you?
Yeah, I did used to share an office space with them about 6 years ago or so. Gosh, time flies. See the signs, it's cancer detection business. They set out originally trying to, create a tool where you can interact with an app and, better understand the detection rates, the problems, the symptoms, because as I'm sure we all know, the earlier you see the signs, the far more likely you are to be able to have a full recovery, and the harder it gets if you don't see the signs. So very much where the business started, struggled a lot early on. Everyone is always saying, well, how are you going to get user adoption? How do you train people who don't understand anything about symptoms or looking at yourself, or maybe they don't even do this kind of stuff? It was challenges. It was tough, it was painful, it was challenging the whole way along. Until finally they went out and they started speaking to some GPs, and they got to better understand what the problem is actually like for a GP. So the time that goes into diagnosing, who are their patients, to assessing symptoms, and actually how do they track it, and what's the approach that the NHS has. And then you start going down into what are the costs associated with cancer care treatment, the remission process versus early capture of understanding what's going on, right? So it becomes you're closer to prevention than you are total reaction solution. All of this learning came from finally speaking to GPs, and again, sometimes you might speak to 5 GPs who all give you boring answers, and then it's the 6th one you speak to who gives you something absolutely electric that you then roll with. So again, we don't know what you're going to find out that's going to help drive your business forwards. But in this case, it was, I don't know, whatever number GP it was they spoke to, who completely transformed their thinking for how they actually sell direct into local practices. They work with the NHS, and then they're not in a position where they are a B2C tool in any way whatsoever, right? They're working directly with the NHS, who then push it out to the customer. So completely different, a radical journey for them, but it only came from learning, from speaking to customers. And this happens all the time. I don't care if you're on day 1 or you're on day 1000, right? The best businesses fundamentally, and I've seen this over and over, and I love this quote. I've forgotten now if it's later in the document. I don't think so, but from Sam Altman, who is the founder and longtime CEO, president of Y Combinator, the single-handedly most successful, most brilliant accelerator program in the world, out in the valley in San Francisco, said the one correlation we see between all of the amazing startups that we work with, any industry, any space, any type of CEO, any founding team, you name it, the one correlating factor is they all work incredibly hard to shorten their feedback loops at every single opportunity. So feedback loop being how quickly you do something and then you talk to someone about it, get feedback on it, and put it straight back into the next piece of thing you do. So from websites to cancer detection apps to helping people move from cities to rural areas, it doesn't matter. It's about talking to the customer as often as possible and as well as possible. And so that
bring to everyone's attention as well, thinking about it, because this is a great process to do at this stage, but that doesn't mean that once this is done, you've got your product, that's it, it's done, you don't need to ask anybody else about it ever again. This is a constant feedback loop, so you can keep coming back and back and back and ask more people, and remember as well that the more people you're asking now, if they are the right people and they are your subset of customers, then potentially you could start creating an email list, because they are going to be the ones that want to buy your product or your service, obviously, once it's all created. So this isn't wasted time in any way, shape or form. Number one, the information is hugely helpful. Number two, you can keep going back to them once you've got different versions of them and just sort of saying, look, I really appreciate your help, we've now changed this, this and this, what do you think? And number three is, like I say, it could be a great customer list for you from day one.
Absolutely.
So this here is just, and if anyone's heard of Steve Blank, he's a master marketer. And again, we've said this already anyway, but it's about getting out of the building. And again, the better entrepreneurs, the ones that are more successful, are the ones that are happy to get out and ask people rather than staying behind their desk. So we're now going to get to the first sort of section. We're going to start looking at creating the hypothesis that you're going to be testing. So what this means is a hypothesis-driven approach to understanding. And hypothesis, if we're not sure about sort of what a hypothesis is, it's essentially an assumption. So a hypothesis is like saying, I assume, my hypothesis is that people moving from cities to rural areas are between the ages of X and Y. You might have a little bit of evidence for that, but it's still a hypothesis. Until you've tested it, until you kind of know for sure, you're making an assumption there that that's true. So we're going to look at hypotheses for who your customers actually are, because again, you might assume that the customer for your app is, a 35-year-old single mum, but in actual fact, you find that more people are interested when they are 40-year-old males, and that might not be something that you discover until you start asking people. So these are all assumptions that we want to test. So what problems and needs they actually have. So again, we're assuming the problem, but we want to actually check that and test the hypothesis. How they are currently behaving, and what solutions or which solutions they will give you money for. Because again, they might love your solution, but if they don't see the value in it, then you're not going to be able to charge them for it. And certainly testing your charge point is a really interesting thing to be doing at this stage too. An example of this as well is that, so my specialty in business is that I work with conscious-led businesses. So I'm specifically interested in helping people to start businesses that, yes, produce them a lot of profit, but at the same time have some kind of social, economic or environmental benefit to everybody else as well. But initially we started looking down the social enterprise route. But when I started doing that research and I started asking people and interviewing people within the social enterprise space, it turned out that training within that area was already quite sufficient, and a lot of it was for free. So for me as an ability to put my service across as a chargeable sort of social enterprise training, I was very unlikely to be actually able to make anything. So I've kind of switched my tactics slightly, and it's worth asking that question again, because like I say, it might be a brilliant solution, but if people aren't willing to pay for it, you're either going to do it as a charity or you're not going to do it at all. Okie dokie. Next slide then, please, Mark.
I've lost my cursor. There we go. Just trying to answer questions in the chat.
So yeah, this very briefly just shows the sort of the customer development sort of feedback loop, as it were. So today we're going through customer discovery. We're looking at the problem solution fit. Does it actually fit? The proposed MVP as well. And we'll talk about, how to ask the right questions, because the other thing that we want to make very, very clear from today is that you at no point want to be pitching your solution. So if you go into, testing all of this, you're speaking to everybody and you're saying, would you use this app that does X, Y, and Z? You've already biased the answers, because before you've even sort of said anything, that all they can now think of is an app, and it's a yes or a no question. So by asking more around the problem itself, you might then find out that, an app wasn't the best idea and they've come up with something else entirely. But you wouldn't ever have got there had you ask them straight off, I've produced this app and I think it's brilliant, and when would you use it? And then looked at proposed funnels, and then you go into the customer validations, so the product market fit, business models, and the sales and marketing roadmap. And like we say, from that feedback, you can then pivot back and do more customer discovery. So it kind of goes round and round and round in that perspective until you feel comfortable with what you have, and then you move over to the sort of the customer creation, when you feel like your product or your service has got the best fit. So this is the sort of the loop that you keep going through. And on the next slide, Mark, we like to call this essentially your unfair advantage, because again, we said this before, and I think Ed said it in the last session last month. If you are there pitching, and I said it earlier too, if you're there pitching and there's two different people and one has created the MVP, they've got this amazing, beautiful, incredible looking app, they spent time, effort, money on doing it, and they're looking for investment on it, and then somebody else has said, well, I haven't got anything yet, but this is my theory and I've tested it and I've spoken to 100 people and they've all said that this is the same problem and this is my solution to it. Investors are going to go for that second one. It doesn't matter that your idea is only an idea at that point and the person is seemingly further ahead with their created and built MVP. You have an unfair advantage because of the fact that you have proof that your idea is in fact a solid one. Whereas the MVP might look lovely, but if they've not spoken to anyone about it, no investor is going to take that chance. Okay, so moving on, we're going to look at the 5 steps. We're going to firstly form the hypotheses. And then once we've formed these hypotheses, we're going to find the potential customers that we want to test these hypotheses on, and then ask the right questions. And again, like I say, we're going to go through what the right question is, because you wouldn't have thought so, but there are wrong ones to ask. We're going to make sense of those answers and then finally figure out what to build and to keep and to sort of learn. So this is again the loop that
Laura sounded suspiciously like she got cut off. Or I've been cut off.
Hi, is this a good chance to ask the question I had earlier?
Yeah, do it, Derek.
Hi, yeah. So kind of thinking about what you said earlier about responding to customers. When I think about some of the large companies, the main one being kind of Apple that comes into mind, sometimes it feels like year after year, there's a lot of things that customer demands. So I think recently one being letting the iPhone have a USB-C, for example, connection. And it also seems as if the company itself then purposely not listening to the customers, they just have their goals, just do kind of what they think is right, and then eventually the customers kind of adapt to what the company wants. So is that only because of the scale of the company? Sometimes they can control the customers, whereas rather than the customers demand controlling the company's aims. So that sounds slightly different to kind of startups, which obviously would make sense to kind of listen to.
Yeah, fascinating questions, my friend. Fascinating. So the story of Apple is always a brilliant startup and growth learning journey, and something I do encourage you to learn from. Steve Jobs was an outstanding, unparalleled entrepreneur who was also very, very, very flawed, very, very flawed, notoriously difficult to work with. To dive into some of your questions, right? It's to what extent can you control what the customer wants or needs. You know, a lot of people have used the phrase "build it and they will come" over the years, because that kind of worked 100 years ago, right? If you built train tracks, people would use them. You built cars, people want them, right? Like, innovation was moving so rapidly, and from a perspective of there was no technology for most people, right? So people were lapping it up. That's now changed entirely, where you're really fighting for people's time. There's a lovely, this is outdated. It used to be, I think Coca-Cola might have done the research originally, but it was, they figured you needed about 3 brand impressions before you would decide if you wanted to buy a new product, right? So be it a new drink, something in the household, you name it, about 3 brand impressions. About 10 years ago, or 15 years ago, that number was up to something like 15, right? Now it's probably even more than double that, because if you think you need a positive brand image on anything from TikTok to LinkedIn to billboards to Netflix to the cinema, TV, you need people talking about your product, you know, and we have more stuff in our lives than ever before. It's harder to compete for attention. And I'm a big believer that you have a lot more competitors than you realize. So a good example is, you know, Netflix's competitors, you know, include books, right? Because they're competing for your downtime to relax you. So Netflix are eating into book sales. So if you want to launch a book, Netflix are an indirect competitor, right? It's tough. Anyway, again, so we can talk all day about this. This is wider market strategy. We can to dive into your topic. Apple are not in a place of massive innovation. They are in the a optimization phase of business, run by arguably someone who will go down as one of the greatest CEO optimizers of all time, as Tim Cook. I'm a huge fan of him in that regards, but he's not a product guy. He's not an innovator. He's not a radical free thinker, entrepreneur, etc. Right? If you look at Microsoft, every time they've kind of optimized, they've then gone back and created new tools, or they buy new stuff to then create or maintain market dominance. So market dominance strategies are very different to early market entry, right? You certainly can't just demand the customer behaves in a certain way. Apple to a degree can, but even then it backfires. To use your specific example, one of the reasons I have an Android phone is because I want to make sure I have USB-C, because when I travel, every single one of my products is USB-C, and I travel a lot. I don't want to bring an extra charger. It's really annoying. So I won't buy an iPhone if it's not USB-C, for example. And they'll have done the calculations and maths behind that and gone, we don't care about Mark, because Mark already has a MacBook and whatever else I own, and we'll keep buying more stuff. You know, fine. We're more interested in winning new iPhone purchasers in a different market somewhere else in the world that isn't the UK, for example. Gosh, that was quite a long answer, and I'm conscious of time. But yes, when you are a startup, you do not get to behave the same way as Apple. And even with that caveat, it doesn't mean that Apple's behavior is the correct behavior. Similarly with Google, Microsoft, anyone else. And if you really want to understand how big corporates work, go read about the breakup of AT&T, where they spoke specifically about how they dampen innovation in the industry in order to maintain a monopoly. And if they had not been broken up, it probably would have pushed back the World Wide Web and the internet revolution by maybe 10 years. So innovation to home with people like us. Laura.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, so if we move on to the next stage, what we're going to do now is everybody is going to pick a challenge. So if you already have an idea, then that's great. That is your challenge. That's the one we're going to go for. If you're still trying to come up with a bit of a concept, you're not really sure which problem it is that you want to solve, there is a link here that if we can just put into the chat, you can get some inspiration from previous entries and previous winners from the MERS Entrepreneurship Awards. And we're going to use this example going forward in the next few stages. So the next slide shows the example that we're going to use. So it's taking AI and aging, and it's asking how would you use data, AI, chatbots, sort of machine learning or cognitive technologies to help support London's aging population. So that's ultimately the idea. But we will show you how that sort of transpires in sort of the questions and the problem that we're looking for in the next few slides. So step number one, we're going to form a hypothesis. So the hypotheses are the educated assumptions. So we need to make assumptions, or we have already probably made assumptions about who wants your idea to exist. So who's your target audience? We assume in our example that the people that are going to be interested are the people actually in old age homes, for example, the people that run old age homes, the people that own old age homes, and the people that whose family members are going into the old age homes. What problems do your target audience face? How big are these problems as well? Because again, a problem can be a problem, but if it's small, then there's not really much of a market there for you. And why would they use your product or service? How much are they willing to actually pay to use it as well? So these are all assumptions that we've probably made along the way, but they're all hypotheses that we're now going to test. So an example on the next slide says elderly people in care homes lack regular connection with friends, family and volunteers outside the care home, and this causes loneliness. It's most likely true. However, it's an assumption that we've made. So we need to test that hypothesis and just make sure that that's true. They have some access to tech hardware, for example, smartphones. They may not. Again, let's test the hypothesis. But they are not comfortable using tech independently. Their preferred means of communication is the phone or a video call, for example, Zoom. And the best way to schedule a time to speak in is through their carer, because they're not going to be able to do it themselves. Again, we assume all of this may or may not be true. Care homes have a monthly budget of about £100 per resident for entertainment. So these are all assumptions that we have made along the way, and we now need to form the questions to test these hypotheses and make sure that we are actually making the correct assumptions. So this is the framework that we're going to be doing. We're going to, in a minute, we're each going to go and have 10 minutes. We're not necessarily going to go out into breakout rooms because this is something that you can do on your own. We're going to have 10 minutes for you to form each of your hypotheses. So there is a link which I think Mark is going to put into the chat, which takes you to a blank version of exactly this, so that you can use this yourself. Make sure that you save your own copy and use it independently. But you're going to do that. Sorry, you're going to write out your hypothesis in the description section, and you can have more than one hypothesis. Obviously, try to stick to sort of 4 or 5 to begin with, but the more the merrier. The more that you can test, the better at this stage. So what are your hypotheses? And then you're going to look at your test approach. So basically, how are you going to test that hypothesis? In this example that we're talking about, for example, one of the hypotheses is the lack of connection with carers and loved ones causes loneliness. So the test approach is that we're going to interview 20 care home residents, and we're going to interview 10 employees and 10 relatives, and we're going to run a survey between them. And the final section is expected results. So this is where you can put down, I'm assuming that this is what I'm going to find out. So we're assuming that 70% of interviewees see loneliness as a critical issue, and 80% of them don't see loved ones enough. We might get wrong. We might find from the information that they say, well, no, actually, maybe most people do see their loved ones enough. Maybe it's actually only 50% of people see their loved ones enough. But either way, we're trying to work out where our assumptions actually lie. And we're going to go down and we're going to create sort of 3, 4, 5 hypotheses, and then work out how we're going to test each and every single one of them. So next slide, Mark.
You're right there, Laura. It seems like you're quite aggressively attacking the microphone.
I see. Is that better?
Definitely.
I think I have a very badly placed mic, because every time I put my hand down to move things, I end up getting the same feedback. So I do apologise. But if I do it again, yell at me. I'll try not to. So we've just had a quick question, I think. Should one of these be expected results? Yes. Yeah. the final section on the right hand side is the expected results. So this is, I'm assuming that's not what's come up on the link. We do apologise. It should be description, test approach, and then expected results. Oh, okay, at the top there it says test approach and test approach. That's fine. That's just a typo there. Apologies. It's expected results. So how are you going to test that hypothesis, and then what are the expected results, or the results that you're expecting? So we are going to have a breakout for 10 minutes now. So the time is 10:56. So we're going to come back at 11:05. Everyone take your 10 minutes, see if you can get as many hypotheses down as possible, and work out exactly how you're going to approach testing those hypotheses. Any questions? Mark and I are still going to stay on here for this 10 minutes. We're not disappearing, but let's take 10 minutes now and we will see you at 5 past. Sonia's made a very good point. Just a point of clarification, this is about your idea, not this idea. This is our example that we tried to use to make it clearer, but you're taking whatever it is that is your idea and your problem issue. If you don't have one, then like I say, you can pick one, or you can use this as well. But if you already have the idea, stick with yours. How did everyone find that? Has everyone got their hypotheses? If we can do some sharing in the chat, this is a really good opportunity to share some of your hypotheses and just to see if you get any feedback from them. So if you guys want to put in the chat, or if you want to unmute and let us know what your hypotheses are, that would be great. Okay, so Sonia says, the technology evolves as quicker as we can adapt to it. That causes the general confusion, depression, and let me click that. Anxiety in our society. Talk with people who left their corporate jobs, moved to rural areas, and to be self-sufficient. People have seen a positive change in their life, being more balanced and fulfilled. Yeah. There's general confusion, depression, anxiety in our society. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. And then I would probably, one of my hypotheses would be around the age of who that would affect. So, I mean, off the top of my head, my assumption would be that younger people are possibly, on the whole, affected less than elderly or sort of middle-aged to elderly people. 35 to 50, yeah, okay. Yeah, absolutely, and that's another assumption. So we sort of, the hypothesis is that the most affected subset of people is 35 to 50. So it might be worth interviewing some people outside of that range, Sonia, so that you can just test that, obviously. You know, interview some 20-year-olds, interview some 65-year-olds, and just sort of see how they're affected. And then, you know, the more people you interview, the more you can sort of narrow it down and say, yeah, I think it probably is that sort of age range. And even within that, there's probably a curve as well. You know, the 35-year-olds won't be affected the same way as 50-year-olds. So again, you can have some hypotheses around the differences in how each of them are affected. You know, what's their biggest issue? So we've got another one here. Current public transit, it's not safe for women. Majority of women have experienced harassment in or around public transit, and they often feel unsafe in or on the way to and from or while waiting for transit. So you want to conduct an online survey, 300 responses, great, from women of ages 15 to 49 living in cities with more than 10,000 population. So 50% from emerging nations, 50% from developed nations with established transportation services. Okay, wow, that's very specific. That's great. That's great. At least 75% of women have experienced harassment in or around public transit. 90% regularly feel unsafe during travel due to concerns for their safety. A great assumption, absolutely. Absolutely, and that'll be a really good one to test, for sure.
I have a question about that. Is it okay if I ask now?
Yeah, please do.
I'm just wondering, how can I find people to, like, survey if, the people you want to survey aren't from UK, let's say, like from other countries where you don't really have a lot of connections?
That is an excellent segue into the next section, which is basically how to find your people. But yeah, I would say if you're looking at people in different nations, you might not necessarily be looking at finding those people individually, but it might be that there are societies that you could contact, or charities, for example. There might be some women's charities that would be willing to help you in each of the different areas that you're looking at. A lot of with this sort of thing is that if you find one person knows another person who's had a similar experience. So the example that we gave on Monday, which I've had before, is there was a group that was creating a particular type of clothing to help people who had strokes. So when you find one stroke victim, obviously usually a stroke victim will go to some kind of support network, or they'll be more inclined to be part of stroke charities or things like that, where they meet other stroke victims because they like the support. So you find one stroke victim who's willing to help you, and then ask them the question, do you know of anybody else that would be willing to help me with my research? So once you've kind of found one person, using that person as a bit of a network and seeing if you can get like I say, some charities that might be willing to send an email around to all of their people, or they might be willing to set something up for you, is a really good segue in. So it doesn't necessarily have to be directly to the individual person. It can be using institutions. So I don't know if that helps, but that would probably be mine.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, that helps a lot. Thank you.
Happy days, happy days. Okie dokie. Shall we move on to the next section then? So now that we have found what our hypotheses are, we need to find and recruit the potential customers to talk to. So the ways in which we're going to do this, if we go to the next one as well, Mark, sorry. Oh, a couple of examples first, yeah. So in our example of the sort of the aging and AI situation, I want to speak to care home workers based in London, and elderly people based in those care homes in London, and also the families of elderly people based in care homes. So remember that it might not be one set of people, there might be a multitude. So if you're creating something, for example, for an education tool for children are going to be the end users, but they're not going to be the payers. So it's going to be mum or dad. So you're going to need to be interviewing both sets of people, because you're interested. You want to make sure the kids are interested in whatever it is that you're producing, because they're ultimately going to be the ones using it. But if parents don't like it in the first instance, or they're not prepared to pay that amount, or whatever it may be, it's never going to get in front of the child in the first place. And maybe schools as well, because that if it's something that you're wanting to try and get in front of children, but you want to go via schools rather than parents, again, who's the decision maker within the school? Who is it? What's their budget? So you could have more than one customer that is worth you interviewing. So moving on to the next slide, the question then is, where might you recruit the interviewees? So we've just kind of gone through a little example there anyway, but this is what we're going to do next, and we're going to take sort of a few minutes in a minute to, and this chart again is on the same link that you had previously. It was under the development toolkit, the hypothesis one, you've got it there. So you're going to again think about who it is that you're interviewing, and it might be 1, 2, 3 people. How many people are actually your interested party for your product or your service? And watering holes just basically means, where are you going to find them? Where do they hang out? where is it that they're going to be? You know, if you're specifically looking to interview, you know, stroke victims between the ages of 50 and 60, if you're standing outside, you know, on a busy street, that's great. But the likelihood of you being able to specifically find stroke victims between 50 and 60 is quite slim. So there's not really much point in you doing that. You'll probably waste quite a lot of time trying to sort of, you know, hone out all the people that you don't need. However, if you are producing a product or a service that is a little bit more broad, and possibly you're looking for, you know, in the example here of, you know, women on transit between the ages of, you know, 15 and 49, if you were doing that locally as well, then there's no reason as to why you couldn't stand outside a tube station, for example. And, you know, you'll be able to hopefully be able to see the women that fit between those age groups and just ask those questions there. What I would say is it's worth trying to make sure that the subset of people that you are interviewing is quite wide and varied. So it's great to start with friends and family that might be able to help you out, or know of people that might be able to help you out. However, you don't want to just stick within your friendship groups, for example, or your family, because, you know, you are more likely to know a certain type of person, which means that you're potentially ignoring other subsets of people as well. So, you know, don't just go by one particular tube station. You might want to do 3 or 4 in completely different areas of London, so that you get a wide variety of people to answer your questionnaire. And then we're going to start thinking about some key questions to ask as well. And we've got a couple, I believe, let me just double check. A couple of examples of how to recruit them on the next slide. So we've got, for example, defining your interviewee recruitment criteria, so making sure that you're speaking to the right people and you're not wasting your time. Starting with friends and family, like I say, that's a great place to start, but don't just stick with friends and family. Asking lecturers, alumni, fellow students. There are potentially people on here that could help you out, depending upon who your sort of most interested parties actually are, or they might know people as well. So again, even if it is, and I keep coming back to the stroke victim example, but if, you know, it is stroke victims, just asking, has anybody got a family member that has, you know, gone through this that would be willing to help me? On socials as well, just putting out a post on Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, you know, trying to find out who it is that might be the most helpful person for you, and sliding into their DMs. You know, would you mind helping me with a couple of quick questions? And like I say, the watering holes is just, you know, where is it that they're most likely to be? So if you are doing stroke victims, they're probably going to, if you approach a stroke victim charity, or you approach a hospital in the stroke department, and just sort of say, look, this is what we're looking to do. We'd really love it if you would be able to help. Then potentially you ask one person and your email gets sent round to 10, 15, 20, 50, 100 people. And meetups as well, joining and attending meetups in your field as well. There's plenty of events online, depending upon what it is you're looking for. There's an app for everything. There's probably an event for everything as well. So have a look online, see what you can find, and try to be a little smart about it. Because like I say, you go to you know, a specific charity or event or something that is designed for the people you're looking for, you're going to be surrounded by people that are going to give you the information that you're looking for and the answers that you need. So there's a couple of useful tools that we thought we might suggest to you guys here. You may have heard them before. So Scrapio scrapes the email contacts direct from LinkedIn. So if you know who it is that you're trying to aim for in LinkedIn. Mark, did you want to add something there?
Yeah, you're doing something with your microphone again, Laura. Sorry,
apologies. Okay, so yes, Scrapio scrapes email contacts from LinkedIn, and then Calendly. The best way to approach these people is to make it as simple as possible for them. So rather than sort of saying, oh, I'd love to have, you know, half an hour of your time, when are you free? If you've got a Calendly link, you're able to just sort of say, book some time in with me. Then it makes it as simple as possible. People are far more likely to say yes. And on the next slide, we actually have an example of an email for you that has proven to be very, very successful in terms of what in terms of, you know, gaining interest and people saying yes. So there's a couple of little psychological tricks in this email that is worth noting. First of all, in the actual title itself, which obviously is the first thing that comes up on their email inbox, it says, "Can you spare 15 minutes to help us tackle loneliness in elderly people in London?" Number one, 15 minutes. You're not asking for an hour. You're not asking for loads of time. Everybody can pretty much spare 15 minutes. So you're not asking for the world, and you've deliberately put that as the forefront thing that they're going to see, so that they don't kind of dismiss the email before they've even read it. You know, they know you're not asking for the world, so they're happy to read on. You start with some sort of colloquialisms, and you start by sort of showing a little bit about why it is that you're interested in what you're interested in. So since my grandmother spent the last 10 years of her life isolated in a care home, nothing keeps me up at night more than thinking about how to reduce loneliness for elderly people in London. What matters to me are the experiences of people like you, etc., etc. So again, it's like, this is why I'm interested. This is my experience. This is who I am. You'll notice that this email is only about sort of 3 paragraphs long, sort of 5 lines long, pretty much in terms of its detail. It's not an essay. And you'll also notice that there is nothing in here about any form of solution. You're literally just asking, you're saying here that the goal is to have conversations with 50 care home professionals and to understand the challenges, and asking them if they're willing to spare 15 minutes. So there's nothing about, I'm trying to create an app, I'm trying to, you know, do this particular solution, and I want to know if it's a good idea. I need an hour of your time. You're keeping it short, you're keeping it simple. The Calendly link is in there, and the email is very much readable before you even have to scroll. So it seems really simple, but those are some really good tactics to increase the number of people that come back to you and actually respond to your request. So next slide. We're going to just take 5 minutes here, because we're very conscious about the time, to just go away and take these hypotheses and fill in those particular sort of interviewee ones. Look at which watering holes you're probably going to find them in, and maybe note down some particular key questions. This isn't finite. You will probably come up with more questions. Don't worry about that. But again, during this 5 minutes, Mark and I aren't going anywhere. Feel free to put some questions in the chat, unmute yourself, ask some questions as you're going along. But let's now each take 5 minutes. It's 20 past 11, so we'll come back at 25 past. Everyone go away and start filling in those sections. Anybody wants to share in the chat who they think that they're going to be interviewing, any potential questions? We're going to go through questions in a little bit more detail now. But if you wanted to ask anything about watering holes, where you would find your potential people, anyone else has any questions, now is a good time. Okay. Well, if anything comes up, let us know. But Mark, would you want to take the next section around questions?
Fab. I'm going to power through this, but please do jump in if you've got questions. The next stage here is asking the right questions, right? What does that mean? Well, I'm a big believer in challenging your thought process. Everything you know is wrong. Well, give or take, right? I'm a big believer when you start from a position of, we understand we all have biases, we have confirmation bias in specific. It's our tendency to pay more attention to the things that confirm what we want to do rather than the things that do the opposite. And funnily enough, we had a great question earlier on from Pawan that was, do we need null hypothesis validation? You don't need it, but it's a great sign you're asking really good questions, because eventually, like if you're asking enough questions of enough high quality, you should get to points where, you know, your customer, let's say Laura, is saying, no, I wouldn't spend that much money on that product, or no, I don't ever think about this. That's not a problem for me. You name it. So that is a good learning, and it shows that you are challenging your own biases. And this is a huge responsibility for product failures. If you Google infamous product failures, there are some amazing examples of brilliant products, but that totally failed. And that you might even say, well, obviously it was going to fail, or with hindsight, it was going to fail. And equally, what some people call hindsight, sometimes it's also knowing the market. There's a very famous story where Simon Sinek, if you don't know Simon Sinek, you should Google him and learn from him. He sat in a cab with one of the very senior execs at Microsoft, who showed him the Microsoft Zune and was like, we're going to absolutely kill Apple with this. It's the best product we've ever made. And he went, yeah, fair enough. He then sat in a cab with someone at Apple, because they were both his clients, and said, hey, Zune are going to kill you. The Zune tool with Microsoft is going to kill you. What do you think? And the guy went, yeah, it's a great product. And that was it. Because a month later, they released the iPhone. And then the iPhone killed the Zune. And you guys probably don't even know what a Zune is. It's the best MP3 player you could get your hands on. But why would you buy an MP3 player when you can have it in your phone? So again, you've got to know what's going on, and you've got to be consistently challenging your confirmation bias and what's going on. So we're more likely to ignore or downplay facts that contradict our beliefs. Lots of people back in the day would say, hey, I can't even imagine a world where people would use a touchscreen phone because keypads are great and I really like using my keypad. So therefore, I'm going to assume everyone else uses keypads and we'll use keypads forever. We all fall into this way of thinking. Oh my God, TikTok's the best thing ever. I can't ever imagine a world without TikTok. So we get to the mum test. Great book, really encourage you read it, by Rob Fitzpatrick. Premise being, if you go to your mum, I've got an idea for a cookbook app, she's going to say, yeah, that's great, darling. Well done. You should do it. I'll buy it. Great. You need to get into asking right questions. If you just go, hey, Laura, I've got a new product coming out. I'm going to make an amazing coffee. Would you buy my amazing coffee? Laura's going to say yes, right? Because she wants to support me. She knows I like coffee. Great, right? It's not valid customer feedback. So how do we ask these right questions? One, no pitching. I shouldn't even be saying, hey, Laura, do you want to buy my coffee? Or how good or how much money would you pay for my coffee? Laura, do you drink coffee?
I was actually going to say no. No, I don't.
There you go.
So I might not be your best customer.
So there we go. So first off, Laura doesn't drink coffee. So everything that she ever tells me should be taken with a massive pinch of salt, because she's almost certainly now doing it because she doesn't want to make me feel bad about my coffee idea, right? And now I have essentially not just useless customer feedback, I have dangerous customer feedback. Because if I then say, hey, Laura, would you spend, in fact, Laura, would you spend £30 for a kilo of my amazing coffee?
Possibly as a one-off, maybe, that I can give to guests, but
you see how difficult it is for her to answer that, because Laura's going, oh my God, I don't buy coffee. I don't know if that is above average pricing, below pricing. Like, do I want to spend 30 quid on coffee? Not really, but maybe I should do, right? That's what's going through her head, and she's not giving me in any way helpful feedback, right? But if I go to someone else who, and I say, hey, Laura, how often do you buy coffee? Oh, I buy coffee 3 times a week. Great. How would you feel about spending X amount on this coffee? Yeah, that's within budget, or that's above budget, so I'd need it to know it's a really amazing coffee. Great, really good, valid feedback. So no pitching, be specific, right? Ask about behaviors, trends. Laura, how often do you buy tea, right? What types of tea do you buy? How often do you have people in your house? Like, do you entertain people? Do you run events, right? What's going on in your life that I can be a part of and sell into? And then we get listen, right? The fundamentals to building a great business come from listening, not talking, right? It's the most age-old mother story. What's the word for it? I've forgotten. But we have one mouth, we have 2 ears for a reason. It almost sounds patronizing, but it's so accurate. And oh my gosh, it's a really painful lesson. In my 20s, I did not listen nearly enough. At all. So you listen, and then let's dive into it. Use examples, dig a little deeper, ask why. Like, Laura, why do you drink so much tea? Oh, it turns out she runs events, or whatever else it might be. Don't lead, right? So again, would you like to buy my coffee? You're trapping people into saying yes. Don't assume, Don't lie to yourself. Take compliments with a lot of salt. Of course, Laura's going to say, hey, Mark, I bet your coffee's really lovely. I would love to buy it if I were a coffee drinker. I might take that as positive feedback. Is it positive helpful in me growing my business? No, not at all. So removing that emotional reaction to these things is incredibly important, and being logical and trying to see things as facts or opinions and where they lie and how they affect your business. So a couple of examples. This is kind of going back to our aging example. How much do you spend on your residents' social activities per month, right? Then you're getting a core metric. You might get a range. You might then start to see trends. Nursing homes of this pricing point spend this much. Nursing homes of this price point spend this much, et cetera, et cetera. How do you deal with the loneliness currently, right? What are current solutions? Because again, you often can't be just slightly better. You have to be exponentially better. So you keep on the tea and coffee. If Laura really enjoys her Twinings tea, for example. In fact, Laura, what is your favorite tea brand?
Oh, Yorkshire tea.
Yorkshire tea, right. So if I make a lovely tea, sure, Laura's going to buy it to support me, but to actually get her to drink that instead of Yorkshire, it's going to have to be significant. Right.
Yeah.
Right. So really good feedback. And it's similar if Laura's invested in technology inside her nursing home and she's put money into that and already spent money, and now she's trying to reap the results. Me coming in with my new solution is putting Laura back to square one to deliver something new with unknown outcomes. So I've got to make sure that I know exactly how bad the current solution is in order to demonstrate my one's going to be much better. And I love this question. How would you rank this problem 1 to 10 in terms of your severity? It puts things into context, right? People might say, oh yeah, I should go to the gym all the time. I should spend a lot of money on the gym. Great, that's really helpful. Or like, I'd love to spend money on a personal trainer. I'm definitely up for doing whatever you're doing your research on. But then you go, what, in terms of your priorities of your budget, where does it fit in terms of 1 to 10? Oh, 0. I'd rather spend all my money on alcohol and going out with my friends. Oh, you're not my target audience all of a sudden. So a very, very good way of getting hard feedback. What solutions have you currently tried? Laura, when was the last time you drank a tea that wasn't Yorkshire tea, and how did it go?
Oh, blimey, I can't even remember. Ages ago. And it was fine, but there's definitely you can tell the difference.
So again, we're talking about tea, but you could apply this to anything else. I've just learned that Laura's probably not going to be an early adopter for whatever I'm selling if her reaction is, oh, I've been doing this for so long, I haven't even looked at alternatives, like I'm not bothered, etc. Right? That doesn't mean you've got a bad business. It just means Laura's not going to be customer number 1. She might be customer number 10 or 20 or 500. Probably not number 1. Tell me an experience about where one of your residents experienced loneliness, right? Specifics. What did it go through, right? Like Laura, last time you did try a new tea, why, how, et cetera, right? Like, was it a gift? Did she go out exploring, buying things? You name it. Learning, learning, learning.
One of my favorite questions on there as well is, what solutions have you already tried? Because that's a really good way of being able to understand. They might actually give you some fantastic ideas. Just because they've tried something previously and it hasn't worked, if you ask some additional questions around that, there's no reason as to why you couldn't sort of adapt that. They might say, oh, well, we've tried an app before, but it didn't work because blah, blah, blah. Ask a few quick questions. What was it about that app that didn't work? Why, would it have been better if, it had X, Y, or Z? You can start to elaborate. And maybe your idea is on that list. Maybe they have tried it before. Okay, well, why would they consider adopting it again? So it's a really, really good question, actually, to work out what they've already been through, why they didn't adopt it, what they would change. And it's a huge amount of feedback can come from that question alone.
And again, right, like you've got to take that emotional element out of it. I can't tell you how many times I've seen people will go and explain their idea, or they'll hear someone say, "Oh, I've already used an app exactly like what you're building," or I've had a tea or a coffee exactly like what you're describing, and I didn't like it and I wouldn't pay for it again. And people can get very dispirited by that. But it doesn't mean that your business is going to go through the same points of failure, right? It might be, let's use technology as an example, right? If they've got this tool for loneliness, maybe it fundamentally just didn't deliver on the things they said it would. Maybe it was so hard to install that no matter how brilliant the outcome was, they never got it going, right? So again, you're always trying to learn what went wrong and what can you do differently. So those outcomes, right? Invalidating assumptions is every bit as brilliant as validating them. And if you're not invalidating anything, then I would question how thorough your approach is. So if your assumption's all correct, why? Are you not listening enough? Are you not asking ambitious enough questions, broad enough questions, etc.? And then, as I said earlier, we keep repeating this process. This isn't a one and done. You survey 100 people and you go, oh my God, I've hit 100. That sounds amazing. And now I'm going to build the best business ever and never talk to anyone again. Right? When you play it out like that, it sounds ridiculous, but it's what people do. A lot of what Laura and I and the rest of the team talk about can sound really obvious and easy, but my God, it is hard to do this stuff day in, day out, over and over, constantly learning, growing, and building amazing businesses. You will beat so many of your competitors because they will just not do this stuff. They will not do the basics. They will get bored. They'll run out of money, or they'll get distracted by shiny things instead of fulfilling their vision.
And we've seen it so many times, haven't we, Mark, when people, like, especially if people sort of feel like they've come up with a brilliant idea, there's almost then like a rush to get it going. It's like, well, I just want to make it now. I just want this business. It's going to be big. Everyone's going to love it. And so this stage especially gets cut out a lot of the time, because it almost feels a little bit like a step back. It's like, I know what I want to do. So, I don't need to really speak to anybody. If I bump into someone, maybe, but I don't need to go out there and do the work. But that's where issues come in, because that's when people don't either understand the problem fully, or they produce something that people don't want, or they rush, and ultimately end up failing. And one of the reasons I do exactly as I do is I'm trying to reduce the number of business failures there are by making sure that the foundations and the step up to actually creating the product or service are there. And a lot of these foundations people completely and utterly skip.
Yeah, cannot emphasize that enough.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, let's start drafting up a couple of questions as some really awesome examples. So back in here, you've got your key questions to ask at your watering hole. Let's I try and run down as many questions as possible. When ideating, it's great to go fast. You want quantity before you want quality. I'd rather you have 20 questions and then you go off and ask 5 of them than you spend ages writing out 5 questions and you ask all 5 of them. I have much more confidence in the former approach 100% of the time.
And you can adjust as you go along as well. If you're finding that you're not necessarily getting the answers that you're looking for, or people aren't kind of expanding on their answers as much, then, look at the wording of the question and change it. But like Mark said, if you're starting with 5 questions that you think are perfect, that's great. Yeah. But you're probably not going to get as much information as going for the 20 and then adjusting along the way.
Yeah. So let's do 5 minutes and a minimum of 5 questions. I imagine most of you will get to 10.
We will see you back here.
If you don't put them in the feedback, no feedback. You know what I mean.
Too much coffee, Mark.
Not enough.
Right, well, I'll tell you, while we're doing that, because I'm very conscious that we're in the last sort of 15 minutes or so, we'll move on to user personas. But if anybody does want to put their questions in the chat, we do have a few minutes at the end that's allocated for questions specifically, so we can always just go through them then. So now that you have worked it all out, and you've got your questions, you know who you're asking, we're going to try and work out your user persona. So this is essentially like a client avatar, if anybody has sort of used that metaphor before, that analogy. So you're trying to create the understanding of exactly who it is that you're targeting. So from all of the questions that you've created, the research you've done, the answers that you're trying to get a much clearer picture of exactly who it is that you are targeting. Now, when I do this with my clients, we literally go down to the very, very specifics. We give our user persona a name, an age. Are they married? Do they have kids? You know, what's their biggest fear? What keeps them up at night? It's like, you want to know everything about this person. Now, that's not to say that, you know, if you come up with, you know, Jenny, who's 35 and a single mum, that you can't sell to, you know, Mark, who's 29 and has no kids. It just means that you start to understand the picture of the person that you're speaking to. And from a marketing perspective, it's incredibly important, because if you just sort of say, well, I'm just selling to people, you know, it could be man, it could be woman, it doesn't really matter what age, like, you know, technically an iPhone could go to anybody, you know. So if Apple turned around and said, well, we're going to market the iPhone to just people who need phones, it's just too broad. You're not actually really going to be speaking to anybody in particular, because nobody's going to receive that marketing and think, that is for me, that's the image that I want. Whereas if you actually look at the marketing that Apple has for their iPhones and for all of their other products, you can realistically see the subset of people that they're trying to aim for. You know, yes, they might have people in their 60s buying iPhones, but the marketing isn't aimed at them. So that's what we're going to do now. We're going to look at the user persona, and we're going to fill in this. Again, this is on the same page, the same link that you've had before. And you're going to try and create this image of this person. So in our example, for example, we have got, let me go back to the slide. You've got Joan, who's 86. She's in a retirement home 30 miles away from all of her family. Her profession, she's a retired nurse, and she gets about £140 a week on pension. So then what are Joan's goals? Well, Joan wants to, you know, easy to use way of keeping in regular contact with her family. She does want to learn some new tech skills, and she wants to reduce the sense of loneliness, because she is feeling a bit lonely and a bit bored. What are Joan's frustrations? Well, from all of my, you know, research and going and speaking to all these people in the old age pensioners' homes, she hates asking for help with tech. She just doesn't like doing it. She doesn't like to be made to feel silly that way. And in the early stages of dementia, she therefore needs to write things down to remember them. So, you know, she's not confident using the iPad as her hands shake as well. So those are some frustrations that Joan has. You know, where are we likely to find other Joans, for example? So if you're looking for, you know, to sell this product on, what other places are you going to find them? Well, are you going to find them on social media? Probably not. Are they going to be at any particular events? Are they going to read any particular publications? You know, who or where is your persona, your person going to be looking, and or being? Motivations, you know, what is their motivation for wanting to solve this problem? You know, and are they big motivations as well? Mark mentioned earlier about the size of the problem on a scale of 1 to 10. You know, it might still be a problem for a lot of people, but if the problem is sort of rated at a 2 or a 3, then it's not really that big enough of a problem. Whereas if Joan is really, really missing the fact that she's missed a few bits of family news, you know, she wants to be able to hear her family's voices, all those sorts of different things, motivations might be likely higher, and of course how they solve it now. So we're looking to sort of fill all of this in for that one particular persona that you're going to be covering. So we're going to, if we go to the next slide, we were going to do a 10-minute breakout on this one, but I'm just very, very conscious of time. So I think that this is something that you guys can take away with you and do in your spare time. One thing I would say is, in a couple of slides time, we are going to say that you have the opportunity for mentoring. So if you do have any questions that come up from this, and you're not really sure how to deal with it, then like I say, you can connect with myself or Mark or Ed as well on LinkedIn. But there is the opportunity as well to book yourself in for some mentoring sessions with Ed directly. And I do believe that the Mayor's Entrepreneurship team are going to be sending that link out in the email after this session anyway. But you can book directly into his calendar, and he can help you with any of that. If you do have any questions, obviously, though, while we are here, Dan's confirmed, yes, we are, excellent. So yes, you can book in with Ed after this. But like I say, we are still on for another 10 minutes. So if there is anything at this point that you guys want to clarify, then please do utilise the time that we are here. So at that point, I suppose, are there actually any questions? Has anybody got anything that they want to clarify? Or anything that they're not sure about in terms of the actual persona? Because I know we've only sort of just gone through it, whether it's persona, whether it's questions, or to be perfectly honest with you, anything that we've covered today. Is there anything that you aren't sure about leaving this session?
Hi, can I ask a question if that's
Absolutely.
okay?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so this kind of relates back to your guys' kind of point about reaching out to customers and getting customer feedback.
Yeah.
Right now, based on the exercise I've done, it's very helpful, but for me, I just think it's quite time consuming in the sense that I have to think of the questions and I have to approach people individually, ask them through, you guys said if you have 10 or 20 questions, then maybe pick 5 out, some like maybe 5 good ones to kind of answer. Right now, my idea, I'm still trying to kind of figure out the exact kind of target demand, or how people, do they really need this kind of service, or if there's things I need to iterate. So one solution I thought, well, not so I thought, maybe some other people have suggested, is maybe just to create like a very kind of simple web form. So this way you can reach out to a massive audience, and obviously people can obviously it doesn't take a lot of time, because obviously people value their time a lot as well. So in that kind of sense, is there any methods or things you can do to kind of reach a very large audience, so you can get kind of just basically like a point of kind of quantity over quality? Let's get a huge amount of responses, see what the general kind of trend is, and maybe rather than the method of kind of approaching people, because I think I've done that, and in the past although the results have been very good, it's just really time consuming. It would take me like 10-20 minutes for literally one response, rather than if it's maybe 5 questions on a web form, or how do I kind of reach a really kind of a large audience?
So a couple of things. Oh, sorry, carry on.
Yes, because the only thing I can think of right now as a student would just be maybe message kind of student unions across the London University, kind of student groups. But obviously, if I want to reach kind of a different audience apart from students, any advice you would give on that? Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. There's a few things that I would just sort of mention, I guess, at this point. Is number one, to your direct question, is yes. I mean, if you can, like with the example I gave about stroke victims, rather than trying to individually find every single sort of stroke victim in the area, if you're able to approach somewhere where they're all going to be, i.e., a stroke charity, or if there is a local stroke department within the hospital, or if there is a support group that deals with stroke victims, or anything along those lines. So you mentioned, I'm not 100% sure obviously what your problem statement is, or what it is that you're trying to solve, but you mentioned that it's sort of students and student unions. Yes, absolutely. Approach the university. Could they send out a general email to everybody and just sort of say, look, this is an online thing, it's going to take you 10-15 minutes, it'd be really helping one of your fellow students out. But also, if there is some sort of where outside of the university that you could also approach that might be willing to do the same, it sort of depends upon what your other kind of personas actually are. If it's just students, then potentially the best place is the student unions, or it is the university itself. But then you've got to ask yourself the questions, where else might students hang out? And especially students that are potentially interested in whatever solution or problem it is that you're talking about. So it's hard to answer that without actually sort of really knowing those kind of things. But the sort of other things that I kind of wanted to bring to your attention is number one, if you're not going to actually interact with the person, i.e. you're just going to send out an online form, that is a great way of doing it for sure. But you need to be very careful about how you word the questions, because you obviously can't necessarily determine how they're going to understand it. Whereas if you are there in person and somebody kind of gives you the wrong answer, and I don't mean that in a sort of like answers are right or wrong, but if they misunderstood the question, you're able to be able to say, oh, sorry, let me just rephrase that a second, and that's how you get the feedback of maybe I need to adjust that question. So really think about the questions before you put it out there, because obviously people will just answer what is on the page. The other thing I would say is that it is still worth, whether you do it at this stage or you do it sort of after you've got the initial responses, it is still worth having some conversations with actual people. Because the one thing that you don't garner when you do it online is, yes, you could get 100 people to fill out your form within a week, and it might provide you some very interesting information, but you're not going to be able to take your curiosity and sort of build on it. And a lot of the time, and where this can be really, really helpful is that you might start with a subset of, 5 questions, for example, but somebody might answer something to one of those questions and you go, oh, that's interesting. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? And actually just the conversation that you're having with that person, you end up finding out something that you would never have thought to have put on your subset of questions. And you start going down a completely different rabbit hole and you're kind of going, I would never have realized that that was actually a thing for them. And then you can ask a couple of other questions around that. So that's the kind of thing that you do end up missing out on. So I wouldn't necessarily just only do it online. I would still try and have a few conversations with other people as well, just so that you can get that conversational response. You can see if there's anything that comes up outside of the set of questions that you have. But at the same time, I agree with Mark. Yes, it is a really good way of getting a lot of answers very, very quickly. I would just make sure that you balance the two out. I hope that sort of makes sense and is possibly a bit helpful.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, it's very helpful. I think just to kind of expand a bit further. So my general audience is going to be people, young people, but essentially, so that will range from maybe 17 to 30 years old. So obviously, it's quite easy for me to find a kind of student range, so maybe 17, 25. But for a bit older, most of these people I know either be working, perhaps. So it's just how can I just reach to those?
Can you just give me a bit of like what's the problem?
So the problem, my problem idea is kind of to offer a electric car sharing platform, and based on some kind of research, most car users would be between the ages of 25 to 40. So that's obviously I'm trying to find out if there's a demand for this. Just basically see if the solution I have currently really does address the problem before I do any kind of things about building a software platform or even any type of MVP so far.
Yeah, so that was very much around the solution itself, because you said, the problem is that I want to provide. So we're talking about the solution specifically. So why are you providing the solution? What is the problem that your users are experiencing?
I think for me personally, it would be kind of, this comes from a problem that even my parents face, is the kind of, they're not very familiar with electric cars, but they will really, really want to use electric, A, because it's sustainable, but B, it's just, it's essentially just, I think it's a good alternative to current cars, and obviously it doesn't use renewable and non-renewable resources and so forth. And especially since from my family, we live in kind of Greater London, so cars obviously is the main transport method that we use compared to public transport. So it's just offering an alternative solution, and so that people don't actually have to buy an electric car to actually use an electric car. So that's kind of the problem and the solution so far.
So the essentially the problem is that they don't really understand it enough, and so you're trying to provide the additional information around electric cars and the benefits, how to use them, all those sorts of different things.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, definitely you've got students, that's fine, but you could, there's no reason as to why you couldn't approach some electric car manufacturers and see if they must have a list of people that have inquired about cars. They must have a list of people that are there any magazines that specifically feature articles on electric cars? I would look at all the different ways. Where are these people getting their information from, but aren't necessarily getting enough of that information? And which age group is it specifically that doesn't understand the most of it? Again, an assumption, hypothesis from my part, but perhaps younger people understand it slightly more. Where is it that they're finding their information from, and where is it that slightly older people are maybe not getting the information from? What are the questions that they have about electric cars? I would ask all these sorts of different questions to try and determine where they're most likely going to be looking. But also, it doesn't necessarily need to be around electric cars. If you just find out that there's actually a really large proportion of people around 35 to 40 that are interested in electric cars, but they're also interested in, I don't know, like darts at the pub, to go to a pub that has a darts board. So I mean, do you know what I mean? They don't necessarily need to be intrinsically sort of linked in that way. It's just knowing where the interests connect with something else, and you might find that subset of people is found mostly in office blocks, in which case, okay, could you ask a couple of your local offices to send around a blanket email? It's about trying to sort of broaden your mind a little bit than just they're interested in electric cars, and do I just stand out on the street and ask for people's information? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's actually great. Great suggestion. And yeah, thanks so much for your help. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries at all. Did you have anything you wanted to add to that, Mark? Or no? I figure if I talk long enough, I'll answer a question.
Right, let's wrap up. It is midday. It has been a real pleasure getting to know you all. I look forward to the next session, which is going to be on value proposition and business model. How do you actually build the building blocks that are necessary for you to have a profitable business? How do you put everything in place? How do you understand it? Wrap your head around these things if you've never built a business model before? And fundamentally, what on earth is a value proposition? How do you build it? And why it is one of the most important statements that you will write in your business building venture.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you guys so much for joining. I hope it's been helpful. As I said, book in for some mentorship with Ed. Connect with us if you would like to. Have an amazing Christmas break. I hope whatever it is that you're doing, you have a great time. And yeah, sign up for the next ones in January. We look forward to seeing you there. Thanks, everyone. See you later.
Thanks so much.